Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtada Khan, your host, and today I'm going to talk to you about the just ended peace talks between the United States and Iran, hosted by the Pakistani government in Islamabad. This is a very prestigious and happy moment for congratulations for them. They are now hanging out and playing with the big boys. But one thing that must be noted as more and more people are being surprised that before the talks began, there was so much optimism that something really positive would come out of these talks. And now there are lots of people who are feeling a bit depressed and disappointed that the talks have not resolved anything at the moment. And the fact that the talks lasted for so long, nearly 21 hours, and went so deep into the night up to 4 a.m. in the morning, it was very clear from that there was hope that much of the things were being perhaps resolved. And so when J.D. Vance gave his press conference, which was rather brief and devoid of any details, there is a complete lack of transparency about the negotiations. And I do understand that they want to conduct these negotiations in private and not in public. Because there are spoilers all over the world, and so they don't want the negotiations to be sabotaged from outside, as it is Netanyahu is trying to do his best to ensure that these negotiations fail and war is resumed. So I don't blame either of the two parties for not being entirely transparent about what was discussed, because the dialogue is ongoing. And once it's over, for sure, and both parties are convinced that they have either resolved their issues or that these are unresolvable by dialogue, then perhaps a lot more will be revealed by both sides. But what is clear to me is that when J.D. Vance made his statement, and he did not close the door, and he didn't say that the dialogue's over. He said that Iran has not given us an affirmative has not convinced us that they're not going to pursue the nuclear weapon. And so we have made them our best offer, a very flexible offer. So we have given them our final and best offer, and now they have to get back to us. I think both parties have made progress in the dialogues. They have understood each other's positions far more clearly without mediating impact of J.D. Kushner and Steve Witkoff. I don't trust the two of them to do an honest job. I do trust J.D. Vance on this particular issue, that since he's so opposed to the war, he's probably going to give Iranians the best possible, shall we say, the benefits of doubt that no other American would give in these negotiations. And I think it is a credit to President Donald Trump that he's serious about this dialogue. That is why he sent J.D. Vance to negotiate, knowing fully well that J.D. Vance was opposed to this war, and perhaps he would make concessions which Trump himself may not make concessions. So I think that Donald Trump's, it was a confidence-building measure sending J.D. Vance to these negotiations. So please listen to what J.D. Vance really said, and then we will go further if I can find what he said. So in that sense, let us see if I can find the video for you about J.D. Vance's statement, and then we will go beyond that.
Precisely what have they rejected here? Can you help us understand it a little bit?
Well, I won't go into all the details because I don't want to negotiate in public after we negotiated for 21 hours in private. But the simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon, and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. That is the core goal of the President of the United States, and that's what we've tried to achieve through these negotiations. Again, their nuclear program, such as it is, the enrichment facilities that they had before, they've been destroyed. But the simple question is, do we see a fundamental commitment of will for the Iranians not to develop a nuclear weapon, not just now, not just 2 years from now, but for the long term? We haven't seen that yet. We hope that we will.
So when he was basically asked what exactly precisely So he was asked what exactly precisely were the Irans opposing? Because if you recall, even in JCPOA, the Iranians had convinced Americans that they will not pursue the nuclear weapons. They had allowed IAEA inspections. And when Donald Trump essentially canceled and withdrew from the JCPOA, even the US intelligence was very clear that Iran was in complete compliance with the conditions in terms of the JCPOA, which is it was not pursuing nuclear weapons. But of course, the anomaly of then why do you have such a large amount of 60% enriched uranium when for civilian purposes you don't need to enrich even above 20%. So that was the sticking point for all of these reasons. In fact, you could argue the most fundamental reason why we have had this war is that particular anomaly. And I think that has not been resolved. I think that that both sides discussed with both points in their hands, the 10 points from the Iranians and the 15 points from the United States. And I think that there is something going on behind the scenes, and I think both the parties are going back to their countries to discuss with their supreme leaders in Iran and in the United States, because there might be some hope and some concessions which only I don't think J.D. Vance wants to take that step himself unilaterally. He wants to convince Trump and say, okay, accept these things. And I think the same thing that the Iranians are trying to do, to go back to Iran and then, in consultation with their supreme leader, make some concessions. But I think this is not the end of it. There is still time. The 2 weeks are not over. The war is not going to start right away. So the negotiations are up. This particular round of negotiations, I think, has not yielded an ultimate result. It doesn't mean that the negotiations have failed. As I've already pointed out, that the biggest advantage or the biggest development was that for the first time since 19 between the United States and Iran. So that is a huge progress, I think. And so I think going forward, that is what it is going to be, even though at some point this also became a trilateral dialogue, which means that Pakistan is going to have some role in monitoring the implementation of whatever would be agreed. So I think that the sticking points for the United States are probably three. The Iranian ministry announced just now that there were three issues on which there was no difficulty in agreement, whereas they have agreed on most issues. And I think those three disagreements are, number one, Iran's possession of nuclear material, which it probably might surrender, but it is not going to give up the right to enrich plutonium and uranium, and nor does it want to give up the science and scientific research around nuclear physics, which is what the United States is demanding, that not only should you give up anything that you have which can make a bomb, but we want you to stop learning anything about uranium and physics and building uranium enrichment plants or rebuilding what was destroyed in June last year. The second issue probably is with the Strait of Hormuz. And I think while they have a disagreement here at the moment, which is Iran wishing to exercise sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz and collecting toll, and the United States objecting to that. But I don't think the US is going to be too worried about it, because Donald Trump has already signaled that he's willing to end the war without resolving the Strait of Hormuz issue. The countries that are most impacted and affected by the Strait of Hormuz, which is China, India, Japan, South Korea, and other Asian countries, he's telling them that maybe they should step up and negotiate or deal with Iran on that ground. And I think Trump is willing. I think in these negotiations, my assessment is that Trump is willing to walk away without completely wresting the Strait of Hormuz out of Iranian hands. Through negotiations. But if they are forced to go back to a war-like situation, then all bets are off. The third thing, I think, is a demand from Americans that Iran should stop supporting the axis of resistance, which means it should stop supporting Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis, basically demanding from Iran to become like the other Arab countries, which is give up and abandon the Palestinian cause. And I think the Iranians are unwilling to do that. and of course, Israeli attacks in Lebanon would have been discussed. And I don't think that the United States can and is willing to put any restraints on Iran. It's a politically very difficult thing for Republicans or any Americans to do that. They are so, in many ways, so much under the thumb of the Israeli lobby and Israel itself that it is next to impossible for American politicians to resist Israel, to deny Israel, to pressure Israel, and then remain in American politics, even though the winds of change are there in the United States. Vast majority of the Democrats are now in favor of the Palestinians as opposed to Israel, but the politicians are still dependent on pro-Israeli money. So that will be a difficult issue. And I think from the Iranian side of it, that what is, to me, critical would have been the lifting of sanctions, the lifting of UN resolutions against Iran. I don't know what's happening. I'm sure in those 21 hours of negotiations, they have discussed all of those issues, especially those 10 points that Iran had highlighted. I have a feeling that if Trump gets a deal, essentially, and he's able to brag that he is the first American president to go to war and end Iran's nuclear program, and to claim that Iran will never, ever be able to threaten anybody in the region, if he's able to claim that in whatever credible way, then I think he's willing to pay a price for that, and that would be allowing Iran to not control the Strait of Hormuz, but perhaps manage it to some extent, and also lift sanctions and also lift the UN resolutions. Now, that would be very tricky because it is important that the UN resolutions be lifted, because then US sanctions on Iran will become illegal and unilateral. And right now they do enjoy some backing of international law, the primary, if not the secondary sanctions that the US has announced and have been in place for a while now, which have hurt Iran's democracy, its development, and its progress. So I think Iran could still walk away from this victory. If Iran genuinely does not want nuclear weapons, then it should simply trade that program off in exchange for lifting of all sanctions, and especially the resolutions of the United Nations. But, you know, for example, if Iran were to dismantle its nuclear program, rebuilding it and reconstituting it is far more difficult than Donald Trump reinstituting sanctions. All he has to do is just sign an executive order, and the sanctions will be back in place. So for Iran, they have to basically deliberate on the issue: to what extent can they trust Donald Trump and Americans to fulfill their obligations even after the agreement, which is going to remain a problem. Because, look, they did get into an agreement with our President Obama, with the JCPOA, which then Donald Trump simply walked out of it. And then Joe Biden did not, after promising even during elections that he would get back into JCPOA, he did not do that. So in that sense, you could say that two American presidents have reneged on the promise that one American president had made. And in fact, one of the guys who reneged on that promise was the vice president and part of the deal itself. That is Joe Biden. He was part of the JCPOA negotiations. So I think my assessment is that, look, it appears right now that no final discussion, no final outcome has come out from these talks. There's nothing for us to out there go and celebrate. But I think that there is a significant progress. The 21 hours of negotiations are going to have an impact. I think J.D. Vance now fully understands what the Iranian position is. And I think in a way, he now owns this policy. So regardless of what Donald Trump says, I think J.D. Vance has become now front and center in the U.S. policy towards Iran. And for him, a lot is at stake, because if all goes bad, he's going to pay a heavy price in 2028, and his ambitions to become the president of the United States could be completely derailed. But if he comes out of this with success, with peace, with the Strait of Hormuz situation resolved in a way that he can claim some kind of credit, then maybe you could say that, well, the ball is in J.D. Vance's hands, and we'll see how well he dribbles and how well he shoots. So anyway, that's the point that I wanted to make. So thank you for watching Conversations. Please like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this with your socio-political network. Until next time, I'm your host, Muqtada Khan. Take care.